evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace, transporting all who listen to a land where joy won't cease. For in these fairy tales, amidst the laughter and tears, the wolf finds his solace, he conquers his fears. As the night grows deeper, he serenades the moon with melodies that linger, a soft and soothing tune. In this sacred hour, where magic abounds, the fairy tale wolf writes love into sound. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. So if you hear a whisper beneath the silver skies, know it's the fairy tale wolf letting his heart rise.
Hey, Guilty. Congrats on getting first. So, how has your week been? I wasn't completely sure if I was going to stream tonight because I can't stay up too late. Because I've got to be on the road about 8 o'clock in the morning to go to a memorial. That's a funny one. Um, a week ago, they went ahead and had her cremated at the memorials tomorrow. But it was another. Well, it's like my grandmother's best friend for her almost entire life. So, also, crazy cat lady. So, my caption's not working. It's okay. It's just she was the one who always did such weird things, and honestly, there's a Porsche 97.7 in her driveway under a carport. That's full of junk. But no, she took care of stray cats like I do, and ended up adopting one that she just calls not my cat. But she was also a big collector of turtles. I think someone actually did a news article on her because she had, at one time, somewhere over 1,000 turtle figures, and turtle stuffed animals, and lots of just turtle stuff. But her memorial's tomorrow at 2 o'clock, which means leaving here maybe 8 in the morning, which means I can't stay up too late, which means my edits are going to be late tomorrow. Let's see. Of course, I've also been fighting with Baldur's Gate all day, trying to get it to work again. Because after the update, it decided it didn't want to. So I pretty much reinstalled everything. Yeah. Of course, when I opened OBS, it said that there was already patches for the new update on that destroyed the closed caption program. And it's still saying that my closed caption isn't showing. Yeah, because Twitch says closed captions enabled, but not available for this content. But I got closed captions working on OBS. I just don't know why Twitch isn't acknowledging it. But anyway, we should probably do fairy tales. Oh, it does make me wonder, the person I'm going to the memorial for, I had given her all 3 copies of my books. I don't know if she's gonna leave those to someone or not. No, I really don't want to think about it. Death is not one of my favorite subjects. I love it when ads run my background sound. But at least I don't record them. And there's my champion chat. I wonder what the library would do if I actually went to the library and just recorded audio for an hour. Or maybe 2 hours. I need a better place to record on. Why am I so large on the screen? I don't know. I should not be this big on the screen, though. Should be like about there. Much better. Okay. But it is Friday night, and Friday night is for fairy tales. And hopefully I won't have technical issues like I had last night, because once again, OBS decided to disconnect. And I had to do the edits from my recording, and, well, yeah. Annoying crap. Contes populares de basaltos? What is basaltos? I mean, the rest of it's fairly Spanish, but this basaltos? Basaltos? I don't know what that is. But it looks like an interesting story title, so I guess we'll get into the stories. So feel free, settle back, get comfortable. Unless you have to get ready for work, then don't fall asleep. We'll start in our stories. And our first story for tonight: The Sacred Milk of Koumongoe. Far away, in a very hot country, there once lived a man and a woman who had 2 children, a son named Koan, and a daughter named Thakne. Early in the morning and late in the evenings, the parents worked hard in the fields, resting when the sun was high under the shade of some trees. While they were absent, the little girl kept house alone, for her brother always got up before the dawn when the air was fresh and cool, and drove out the cattle to the sweetest patches of grass he could find. One day, Kone had slept later than usual. His father and mother went to their work before him, and there was only Thakne to see him busy making the bread for supper. "Thakne," he said, "I'm thirsty. Give me a drink from the tree Koumongoe, which has the best milk in the world." "Oh, Kone," cried his sister, "do you know that we're forbidden to touch that tree? What would father say when he came home? For he would know for sure." "Nonsense," replied Kane. "There is so much milk in Koumongoe that he will never miss a little. If you won't give it to me, I shan't take the cattle out. They will just have to stay in all day in the hut, and you know that they will starve." And he turned from her in a rage, and sat down in the corner. After a while, the Kane said to him, "It's getting hot. You had better drive out the cattle now." But Kwane only answered sulkily, "I told you I'm not going to drive them out at all. If I have to do without milk, they shall do without grass." The Kane did not know what to do. She was afraid to disobey her parents, who would most likely beat her. Yet the beasts would be sure to suffer if they were kept in, and she would perhaps be beaten for that too. At last she took an axe and a tiny earthen bowl. She cut a very small hole in the side of Koumongoe, and out gushed enough milk to fill the bowl. "Here's the milk you wanted," she said, going up to Kwane, who was still sulking in his corner. "What is the use of that?" grumbled Kwane. "Why, there's not enough to drown a fly. Go and get me 3 times as much." Trembling with fright, the Kane returned to the tree. real weird sounds over my speakers. Trembling with fright, the Kane returned to the tree and struck it a sharp blow with the axe. In an instant there poured forth such a stream of milk that it ran like a river into the hut. "Koumongoe, Koumongoe," cried she, "come and help me to plug up the hole. There will be no milk left for father and mother." But Koumongoe could not stop it any more than the Kane, and soon the milk was flowing through the hut downhill towards their parents in the fields below. The man saw a white stream a long way off and guessed what had happened. "Wife, wife," he called loudly to the woman who was working at a little distance. "Do you see Koumongoe running fast down the hill? There is some mischief of the children's, I'm sure. I must go home and find out what is the matter." And they both threw down their hoes and hurried to the side of Koumongoe. Kneeling on the grass, the man and his wife made a cup of their hands and drank the milk from it. No sooner had they done this than Koumongoe flowed back again up the hill and entered the hut. "The Kane," said the parents severely when they reached home, panting from the heat of the sun. "What have you been doing? Why did Koumongoe come to us in the fields instead of staying in the gardens?" "It's Koumongoe's fault," answered the Kane. "He would not take the cattle to feed until he drank some of the milk from Koumongoe. So, as I did not know what else to do, I gave it to him." The father listened to the Kane's words, but made no answer. Instead, he went outside and brought in 2 sheepskins, which he stained red and sent for a blacksmith to forge some iron rings. The rings were then passed over Kane's arms and legs and neck, and the skins fastened on her before and behind. When all was ready, the man sent for his servants and said, "I'm going to get rid of the Kane." "Get rid of your only daughter?" they answered in surprise. "But why?" "Because she has eaten what she ought not to have eaten. She has touched the sacred tree which belongs to her mother and me alone." And turning his back, he called to the Kane to follow him, and they went down the road which led to the dwelling of an ogre. While they were passing along some fields where the corn was ripening, and when a rabbit suddenly sprang out at their feet and was standing on his hind legs, it sang, "Why do you give your child to the ogre? You fair, so fair." "You had better ask her," replied the man. "She is old enough to give you an answer." Then, in turn, Kane sang, "I gave Koumongoe to Kouote, Koumongoe to the keeper of the beasts. For without Koumongoe they could not go to the meadows. Without Koumongoe they would starve in their hut. That is why I gave him the Koumongoe of my father." And when the rabbit heard that, he cried, "Wretched man, it is you whom the ogre should eat, and not your beautiful daughter." But the father paid no heed to what the rabbit said, and only walked on further, bidding the Kane to keep close behind him. By and by they met with a troop of great deer, called elands, and they stopped when they saw the Kane and sang, "Why do you give the ogre your child so fair, so fair?" "You had better ask her," replied the man. "She is old enough to give you an answer." Then, in her turn, the Kane sang, "I gave Koumongoe to Koumongoe to the keeper of the beasts. For without Koumongoe they would not go to the meadow. Without Koumongoe they would starve in the hut. That is why I gave him the Koumongoe of my father." And the Ellens all cried, "Wretched man, it is you whom the ogre should eat, and not your beautiful daughter." By this time it was nearly dark, and the father said they would travel no further that night, and must go to sleep where they were. The Kane was indeed thankful when she heard this, for she was very tired, and found the 2 skins fastened around her almost too heavy to carry. So in spite of her dread of the ogre, she slept till dawn, when her father woke her and told her roughly that he was ready to continue their journey. Crossing the plain, the girl and her father passed a herd of gazelles feeding. They lifted their heads, wondering who was out so early, and when they caught sight of the Kane, they sang. "Why do you give the ogre your child, so fair, so fair?" "You had better ask her," replied the man. "She is old enough to answer for herself." Then, in her turn, the Kane sang. "I gave Koumongoe to Kouane, Koumongoe to the keeper of the beasts. For without Koumongoe, they would not go to the meadow. Without Koumongoe, they would starve in their huts. That is why I gave him the Koumongoe of my father." And the gazelles all cried, "Wretched man, it is you whom the ogre should eat, and not your beautiful daughter." At last they arrived at the village where the ogre lived, and they went straight to his hut. He was nowhere to be seen, but in his place was his son, Masilo, who was not an ogre at all, but a very polite young man. He ordered his servants to bring a pile of skins for the Kane to sit on, but told her father he must sit on the ground. Then, catching sight of the girl's face, which she had kept down, he was struck by its beauty, and put the same question that the rabbit, the ewens, and the gazelles had done. The Kane answered him as before, but he instantly commanded that she should be taken to the hut of his mother and placed under her care, while the man should be led to his father. Directly the ogre saw him, he bade the servant throw him in a great pot which always stood ready on the fire, and in 5 minutes he was done to a turn. After that the servant returned to Masilo and related all that had happened. Now Masilo had fallen in love with the Kane the moment he saw her. At first he did not know what to make of this strange feeling, for all his life he had hated women, and had refused several brides whom his parents had chosen for him. However, they were so anxious that he should marry that they willingly accepted the Kane as their daughter-in-law, though she did bring in a marriage portion with her. After some time, a baby was born, and the Kane thought it was the most beautiful baby that was ever seen. But when her mother-in-law saw it was a girl, she wrung her hands and wept miserably, saying, "Oh, miserable mother, miserable child! Alas for you! Why were you not a boy?" The Kane, in great surprise, asked the meaning of her distress, and the old woman told her that it was custom in the country that all girls who were born should be given to the ogre to eat. But the Kane clasped her baby tightly in her arms and cried, "But it is not the custom in my country. There the children die, they are buried in the earth. No one shall take my baby from me." That night, when everyone was in the hut was asleep, the Kane rose, and carrying her baby on her back, went down to a place where the river spread itself out into a large lake, with tall willows all around the bank. Here, hidden from everyone, she sat down on a stone and began to think what she should do to save her child. Suddenly she heard a rustling among the willows, and an old woman appeared before her. "What are you crying for, my dear?" she said. And the Kane answered, "I was crying for my baby. I cannot hide her forever, and if the ogre sees her, he will eat her, and I would rather she was drowned than that." "What you say is true," replied the old woman. "Give me your child, and let me take care of it. And if you will fix a day to meet me here, I will bring the baby." Then the Kane dried her eyes and gladly accepted the old woman's offer. When she got home, she told her husband she had thrown it in the river and had watched it go down the direction, never thought of doubting what she said. On the appointed day, the Kane stepped out when everybody was busy and ran down the path that led to the lake. As soon as she got there, she crouched among the willows and sang softly, "Bring to me Dilla, Dilla the rejected one, Dilla whom her father Masilo cast down." And in a moment the old woman appeared, holding the baby in her arms. Dilla had become so big and strong that the Kane's heart was filled with gratitude, and she stayed as long as she dared, playing with her baby. At last she felt she must return to the village, lest she should be missed, and the child was handed back to the old woman, who vanished with her into the lake. Children grow up rather quickly underneath when they live underwater, and in less time than anyone supposed, Dyla had changed from a baby to a woman. Her mother came to visit her whenever she was able, and one day, when they were sitting talking together, they were spied out by a man who had come to cut willows to weave into baskets. He was so surprised to see how the face of the girl was to Marcelo that he left his work and returned to the village. "Marcelo," said he when he entered the hut, "I've beheld your wife near the river with a girl who must be your daughter. She is so like you. We have been deceived, for we all thought she was dead." When he heard this, Marcelo tried to look shocked because his wife had broken the law, but in his heart he was very glad. "But what shall we do now?" he asked. "Make sure for yourself that I'm speaking the truth by hiding among the bushes the first time that the Kane says she's going to bathe in the river, and waiting till the girl appears." For some days, the Kane stayed quietly at home, and her husband began to think a man had been mistaken. But at last she said to her husband, "I'm going to bathe in the river." "Well, you can go," answered he, but he ran quickly down by another path, and got there first, and hid himself among the bushes. An instant later, the Kane arrived, and standing on the bank, she sang, "Bring to me Dilla, Dilla the rejected one, Dilla whom her father Marcelo cast out." Then the old woman came out of the water, holding the girl, now tall and slender, by the hand. And as Marcelo looked, he saw that she was indeed his daughter, and he wept for joy that she was not lying dead in the bottom of the lake. The old woman, however, seemed uneasy, and said to the Kane, "I feel as if someone was watching us. I will not leave the girl today, but will take her back with me." And sinking beneath the surface, she drew the girl after her. After they were gone, the Kane returned to the village, which Marcelo had managed to reach before her. All the rest of the day he sat in the corner weeping, and his mother, who came in, asked, "Well, why are you weeping so bitterly, my son?" "My head aches," he answered. "It aches very badly." And his mother passed on and left him alone. In the evening he said to his wife, "I have seen my daughter in the place where you told me you had drowned her, and said she lives at the bottom of the lake, and has now grown into a young woman." "I don't know what you're talking about," replied the Kane. "I have buried my child under the sand on the beach." Then Marcelo implored her to give the child back to him, but she would not listen, and only answered, "If I were to give her back to you, you would only obey the laws of your country and take her to your father, the ogre, and she would be eaten." But Marcelo promised that he would never let his father see her, and now that she was a woman, no one would try to hurt her. So Thakane's heart melted, and she went down to the lake to consult the old woman. "What am I to do?" she asked, when, after clasping her hands, the old woman appeared before her. "Yesterday Marcelo beheld Dada, and ever since he has entreated me to give him back his daughter." "If I let her go, he must pay me 1,000 head of cattle in exchange," replied the old woman, and Takane carried her answer back to Marcelo. "Why, I would gladly give her 2,000, cried he, "for she has saved my daughter." And he bade messengers hasten to all the neighboring village and tell his people to send him at once all of the cattle he possessed. When they were all assembled, he chose 1,000 of the finest bulls and cows, and drove them down to the river, followed by a great crowd, wondering what would happen. But the Kane stopped forward from the cattle and sang, "Bring to me Dilla, Dilla the rejected one, Dilla whom her father Marcelo cast out." And Dilla came from the waters, holding out her hands to Marcelo and the Kane, and in her place the cattle sank into the lake, and were driven by the old woman to the great city filled with people, which lies at the bottom. Because, cities at the bottom of the lake are a good thing. And they need cows. Because, can't only eat fish. Hey, another North American tale. Adapted from the Bureau of Ethnology. Our next story. The Wicked Wolverine. One day, Wolverine was out walking on a hillside, when on turning a corner, he suddenly saw a large rock. "Was that you I heard talking just now?" he asked, for Wolverines are curious animals, and always like to know the reasons for things. "No, certainly not," answered the rock. "I don't know how to walk." "But I saw you walking," continued the Wolverine. "I am afraid you were not taught to speak the truth," retorted the rock. "I need not speak like that. I have seen you walking," replied the Wolverine, "though I'm quite sure that you could never match me." Then he ran a little distance and stopped to see if the rock was pursuing him. But to his vexation, the rock was still at the same place. Then the Wolverine went up close and struck the rock a blow with his paw, saying, "Well, will you catch me now?" "I can't walk, but I can roll," answered the rock. The Wolverine laughed and said, "Oh, well, that will do just as well," and began to run down the side of the mountain. At first, he went quite slowly, just to give the rock a chance, he thought to himself. But soon he quickened his pace, for he found that the rock was almost at his heels. But the faster the Wolverine ran, the faster the rock rolled, and by the little creature began to get very tired, and was sorry he had not left the rock to itself. Thinking that it could not manage to put a spurt, he could reach the forest of great trees at the bottom of the mountain, where the rock could not come. He gathered up all his strength, and instead of running, he leaped over sticks and stones. But whatever he did, the rock was always close behind him. At length he grew so weary that he could not even see where he was going, and catching his foot in a branch, he tripped and fell. The rock stopped at once, but there came a shriek from the Wolverine. "Swoop legs, close." "Get off! Get off! Can't you see that you're on my legs?" "Why did you not leave me alone?" asked the rock. "I did not want to move. I hate moving. But you would have it, and certainly shan't move now till I am forced to." I will call my brothers," answered the Wolverine. "There are many of them in the forest, and you will soon see that they are stronger than you." And he called, and called, and called, till wolves and foxes of all sorts of creatures came running to see what was the matter. "How did he get under that rock?" they asked, making a ring around him. But they had to repeat the question several times before the Wolverine would answer, for he, like many other persons, found it hard to confess that he brought his troubles on himself. "Well, I was dull and wanted to play with someone," he said at last in a sulky voice, "and I challenged the rock to catch me. Of course, I thought I could run the fastest, but I tripped and it rolled on me. It was just an accident." "It serves you for being so silly," they said, and they pushed and hauled the rock for a long time without making it move an inch. "You're no good at all," cried the Wolverine crossly, for it was suffering in great pain. "If you cannot get me free, I shall see what my friends the lightning and thunder can do." And he called loudly to the lightning to come and help him as quickly as possible. In a few minutes, a dark cloud came rolling up in the sky, giving out such terrific claps of thunder that the wolves and foxes and all the other creatures ran helter-skelter in all directions. But frightened though they were, they did not forget to beg the lightning to take off the Wolverine's coat and free his legs, but to be careful not to hurt him. So the lightning disappeared into a cloud for a moment to gather up fresh strength, then came rushing down, right upon the rock, which sent it flying in all directions, and took the Wolverine's coat so neatly that it was torn into tiny shreds. The Wolverine himself was quite unharmed. "That was rather clumsy of you," said he, standing up naked in his flesh. "Surely you could have split the rock without tearing my coat to bits." And he stooped down to pick up the pieces. It took him a long time, for there were a great many of them, but at last he had them all in his hand. "I'll go to my sister the frog," he thought to himself, "and she will sew them together for me." And he set off at once for the swamp in which his sister lived. "Will you sew my coat together? I had an unlucky accident that is quite impossible to wear," he said when he found her. "With pleasure," she said, for she had always been taught to be polite, and getting her needle and thread, she began to fit the pieces. But though she was very good-natured, she was not very clever, and she got some of the bits wrong. When the Wolverine, who was very particular about his clothes, came to put it on, he grew very angry. "What a useless creature you are!" he cried. "Do you expect me to go about in such a coat as this? Why, it bulges down the back as if I had a hump. It is so tight across the chest that I expect to burst every time I breathe. I knew you were stupid, but I did not think you were that stupid." And giving the poor frog a blow on her head, which knocked her straight into the water, he walked off in a rage to his younger sister, the mouse. "I tore my coat this morning," he began, when he had found her sitting at the door of her house, eating an apple. "It was all in little bits, and I took it to our sister Frog to ask her to sew it for me. But just look at what she has done with it. You'll have to take it to pieces and fit them together properly, and I hope I shall not have to complain again." Thank you for that, right? For as the Wolverine was older than the mouse, he was accustomed to speak to her in this manner. However, the mouse was used to it, and only answered, "I think you had better stay here till it is done, and if there's any alteration needed, I can make it." So the Wolverine sat down on a heap of dry ferns, and picking up an apple, he finished it without even asking the mouse's leave. At last the coat was ready, and the Wolverine put it on. "Yes, it fits very well," he said. "You have sewn it very neatly. When I pass this way again, I will bring you a handful of corn as a reward." And he ran off as smart as ever, leaving the mouse quite grateful behind him. He wandered about for many days, till he reached a place where food was very scarce. For a whole week he went without any. He was growing desperate when he suddenly came upon a bear that was lying asleep. "Ah, here is food at last," he thought. But how was he to kill the bear, who was so much bigger than himself? There was no use to try force. He must invent some cunning plan. There was no use to this force. He must invent some cunning plan which would get her into his power. At last, after thinking hard, he decided upon something, and going up to the bear, he exclaimed, "Is that you, my sister?" The bear turned around and saw the Wolverine, and murmuring to herself so low that nobody could hear, "I never heard before that I had a brother," got up and ran quickly up a tree, up which she climbed. Now the Wolverine was very angry when he saw his dinner vanishing in front of him, especially as he could not climb the tree like a bear. So he followed and stood at the foot of the tree, shrieking as loud as he could. "Come down, sister! Our father has sent us to look for you. You were lost when you were a little girl and went out picking berries, and when it was only the other day that we heard from a beaver that you were here." At these words, the bear came a little way down the tree, and the Wolverine, seeing this, went on. "Are you not fond of berries? I am, and I know a place where they grow so thick the ground is quite hidden. Why, look for yourself. That hillside is quite red with them." "I can't see far," answered the bear, now climbing down altogether. "You must have wonderfully good eyes. I wish I had, but my sight is very short. So is mine till father smashed a pail full of cranberries and rubbed them in my eyes, replied the Wolverine. But if you'd like to go and gather some berries, I will do just as he did, and soon you will be able to see as far as me. It took the bear a long while to gather the berries, for she was slow about everything. Besides, they made her back ache to stoop. But as soon as she returned with a sackful and put them down beside the Wolverine, "That is splendid, sister," replied the Wolverine. "Now lay flat on the ground with your head on this stone, while I smash them." The bear, who was very tired, was only too glad to do as she was bid, and stretch herself comfortably on the grass. "I am ready now," said the Wolverine after a bit. "Just at first you will find that the berries make your eyes smart, but you must be careful not to move, or the juice will run out, and then it will have to be done all over again." So the bear promised to lie very still, but the moment the cranberries touched her eyes, she sprang up with a roar. "Oh, you mustn't mind a little pain," said the Wolverine. "It will soon be over, and then you will see all sorts of things you've never dreamt of." The bear sank down with a groan, and as her eyes were full of cranberry juice, which completely blinded her, the Wolverine took up a sharp knife and stabbed her in the heart. Then he took off her skin, and stealing some fire from a tent, which his sharp eyes perceived hidden behind a rock, he set about roasting the bear a bit by bit. He thought the meat was the best he had ever tasted, and when dinner was done he made up his mind to try that same trick again, if he was ever hungry. And very likely he did. What the hell? A Wolverine killed a bear for food. Guess Wolverine's gotta eat. Sounds like a frickin' honey badger. Which, pretty much, Wolverines are pretty close. So you got 20 minutes. I should be able to get another story. So our third story for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales. The husband of the rat's daughter. The X-Men don't approve? Yeah. Wolverine killed a bear after blinding her with cranberry juice. Yeah. Cranberry juice to blind a bear. I guess it will work. It's from Contes Populaires. Yeah. The husband of the rat's daughter. Once upon a time there lived in Japan a rat and his wife, who came of an old and noble race, and had one daughter, the loveliest daughter in all the rat world. Her parents were very proud of her, and spared no pains to teach her all that she ought to know. There was not another young lady in the whole town who was as clever as she was in gnawing through the hardest wood, or who could drop from such a height on a bed, or run away so fast if anyone was heard coming. Great attention, too, was paid to her personal appearance, and her skin shone like satin, while her teeth were as white as pearls, and beautifully pointed. Of course, with all these advantages, her parents expected her to make a brilliant marriage, and as she grew up, they began to look about for a suitable husband. But here a difficulty arose. The father was a rat from the tip of his nose to the end of his tail, and outside as well as in, and desired that his daughter should wed among her own people. She had no lack of lovers, but her father's secret hopes rested on a fine young rat with mustaches which almost swept the ground, whose family was still nobler and more ancient than his own. Unluckily, the mother had other views for her precious child, She was one of those people who always despise their own family and surroundings and take pleasure in thinking that they themselves are made of finer material than the rest of the world.
Her daughter should never marry a mere rat,
she declared, holding her head high.
With her beauty and talent, she had the right to look for someone a little better than that.
So she talked, as mothers will, to anyone that would listen to her. What the girl thought about the matter nobody knew or cared. It was not the fashion in the rat world. There were many quarrels which the old rat and his wife had upon the subject, and sometimes they bore on their faces certain marks which looked as if they had not kept to words only.
"Reach up to the stars is my motto,"
cried the lady one day, when she was in a greater passion than usual.
"My daughter's beauty places her higher than anything upon earth," she cried, "and I'm certainly not going to accept a son-in-law who's beneath her."
"Better offer her in marriage to the sun," answered her husband impatiently. "As far as I know, there's nothing greater than he."
"Well, I was thinking of it," replied the wife, "and as you are of the same mind, we will pay him a visit tomorrow."
So the next morning the two rats, having spent hours in making themselves smart, set out to see the sun, leading their daughter between them. The journey took some time, but at length they came to the golden palace where the sun lived.
"Noble king," began the mother, "behold our daughter. She is so beautiful that she is above everything in the whole world. Naturally, we wish for a son-in-law who, on his side, is greater than all. Therefore we have come to you."
"I am much flattered," replied the son, who was so busy that he had not least wished to marry anyone. "You do me great honor by your proposal. Only, in one point you are mistaken. It would be wrong of me to take advantage of your ignorance. There is something greater than I am, and that is a cloud. Look." And as he spoke, a cloud spread itself over the sun's face, blotting out the rays.
"Oh, well, we shall speak to the cloud,"
said the mother, and turning to the cloud, she repeated her proposal.
"I am indeed unworthy of anything so charming," answered the cloud. "But you make a mistake again in what you say. There is one thing that is even more powerful than I, and that is the wind. Here he comes. You can see it for yourself." And she did see, for catching the cloud as he passed, he threw it on the other side of the sky, and tumbling further, mother and daughter down to the earth again. He paused for a moment beside them, his foot on an old wall. When she had recovered her breath, the mother began her little speech once again. "The wall is the proper husband for your daughter,"
answered the wind, whose home consisted of a cave, which he only visited when he was not rushing about elsewhere.
"You can see for yourself that he is greater than I, for he has the power to stop me in my flight."
And the mother, who did not trouble to conceal her wishes, turned at once to the wall. Then something happened which was quite unexpected to everyone.
"I will marry the old ugly wall, which is as old as my grandfather,"
sobbed the girl, who had not uttered one word this whole time.
"I would have married the sun or the cloud or the wind, because it was my duty. Although I love a handsome young rat and him only, with the horrid old wall, I would sooner die."
And the wall, rather hurt in his feelings, declared that he had no claim to be a husband of so beautiful a girl. "It is quite true," said he, "that I can stop the wind, who can part the clouds, who can cover the sun. But there is someone who can do more of these than all, and that is the rat. It is the rat who passes through me and can reduce me to powder simply with his teeth. If, therefore, you want a son-in-law who is greater than the whole world, seek him among the rats." "Ah, what did I tell you?" cried the father. And his wife thought for a moment, though angry at being beaten, soon thought that a rat son-in-law was what she had always desired. So the three returned home happily, and the wedding was celebrated 3 days after. Uh-huh. Interesting way to compare yourself to things. Okay, the next story is 9 pages, so I don't think I'd get it done before the ads. So we'll run the ads instead. See you in a bit. Jeez. I really gotta find better background audio. So the ad should be over. Well, the timer said it was over. So, we're back. Let's continue. Oh, this one's from Lapland. This is Laplandish Machersen, which this means it's a German book about Lapland. Yeah. So our next story for the night: The Mermaid and the Boy. Long, long ago, there lived a king who ruled over a country by the sea. When he had been married about a year, some of his subjects, inhabiting a distant group of islands, revolted against his laws, and it became needful for him to leave his wife and go in person to settle the disputes. The queen feared that some ill would come of it, and implored him to stay at home, but he told her that nobody could do his work for him. And the next morning the sails were spread, and the king started on his voyage. The vessel had not gone very far when she ran upon a rock, and struck her so fast in a cleft that the strength of the whole crew could not get her off again. To make matters worse, the wind was rising too, and it was quite plain that in a few hours the ship would be dashed to pieces, and everybody would be drowned. And suddenly the form of a mermaid was seen dancing on the waves, which threatened every moment to overwhelm them. "There's only one way to free yourselves," she said. That's supposed to be a woman. Let me try that again. "There's only one way to free yourselves," she said to the king, bobbing up and down in the water as she spoke. "And that is to give me your solemn word that you will deliver to me the first child that is born to you." The king hesitated at this proposal. He hoped that someday he might have children in his home, and thought that he must yield up the heir to his crown. It was very bitter to him. But then a huge wave broke with great force on the ship's side, and his men fell on their knees and entreated him to save their lives. So he promised, and this time a wave lifted the vessel clean off the rock, and she was in the open sea once more. The affairs of the island took longer to settle than the king had expected, and some months had passed away before he returned to his palace. In his absence, a son had been born to him, and so great was his joy that he quite forgot the mermaid and the price that he had paid for the safety of his ship. But as the years grew on, the baby grew into a fine big boy. The remembrance of it came back, and one day he told the queen the whole story. From that moment, the happiness of both their lives was ruined. Every night they went to bed, wondering if they would find his room empty in the morning, and every day they kept him by their sides, expecting him to be snatched away before their very eyes. At last the king felt that this state of things could not continue, and he said to his wife, "After all, the most foolish thing in the world one can do is to keep a boy here in exactly the place in which the mermaid will seek him. Let us give him food and send him on his travels, and perhaps, if the mermaid ever blocks come to see him, she may be content with some other child." And the queen agreed that this plan seemed the wisest. So the boy was called, and his fathers told him the story of the voyage, and as he told his mother before him. The prince listened eagerly, and was delighted to think that he was to go away all by himself to see the world, and was not in the least frightened, for though he was now 16, he had scarcely been allowed to walk alone beyond the palace gates. He began busily to make his preparations, and took off his smart velvet coat, and putting on instead a green cloth, while he refused the beautiful bag which the queen offered him to hold his food, and slung a leather knapsack over his shoulders instead. And just as he had seen other travelers do. Then he bade farewell to his parents and went on his way. All through the day he walked, watching with interest the strange birds and animals that darted across his path in the forest, or peeped at him from behind a bush. But as evening drew, he became tired, and looked about for a place he wanted. But as evening drew on, he looked tired, and looked about as he walked for some place where he could sleep. At length he reached a soft, mossy bank under a tree, and was just about to stretch himself out on it, when a fearful roar made him start and tremble all over. In another moment something passed swiftly through the air, and a lion stood before him. "What are you doing here?" asked the lion, his eyes glaring fiercely at the boy. "I'm flying from the mermaid," the prince answered, in a quaking voice. "Give me some food, then," said the lion. "It is past my supper time, and I am very hungry." The boy was so thankful that the lion did not want to eat him that he gladly picked up his knapsack, which lay on the ground, and held out some bread and a flask of wine. "I feel better now," said the lion when he had done. "Now I shall go to sleep on the soft moss, and if you like, you can lie down beside me." So the boy and the lion slept soundly side by side till the sun rose. "I must be off now," remarked the lion, shaking the boy as he spoke. "But cut off the tip of my ear and keep it carefully, and if you are in any danger, just wish yourself a lion, and you will become one on the spot. One good turn deserves another, you know." The prince thanked him for his kindness, and did as he was bid, and the two then bade each other farewell. "I wonder how it feels to be a lion," thought the boy, and after he had gone a little way, he took the tip of the ear from the breast of his pocket, and wished with all his might. In an instant his head had swollen to several times its usual size, and his neck seemed very hot and heavy, and somehow his hands became paws, and his skin grew hairy and yellow. What pleased him most was his long tail with a tuft at the end, which he lashed and twitched proudly. "I like being a lion very much," he said to himself, and trotted gaily along the road. After a while, however, he got tired of walking in this unaccustomed way. It made his back ache, and his front paws felt sore. So he wished himself a boy again, and in a twinkling of an eye, his tail disappeared and his head shrank, and the long, thick mane became short and curly. Then he looked for a sleeping place, and found some dry ferns, which he gathered and heaped up. But before he had time to close his eyes, there was a great noise in the trees nearby, as if a big heavy body was crashing through them. The boy rose and turned his head, and saw a huge black bear coming towards him. "What are you doing here?" cried the bear. "I'm running away from the mermaid," answered the boy. But the bear took no interest in the mermaid, and only said, "I am hungry. Give me something to eat." The knapsack was lying on the ground among the fern, but the prince picked it up, and, unfastening the strap, took out a second flask of wine and another loaf of bread. "Hey, Nerdy, we will have supper together," he remarked politely. But the bear, who had never been taught manners, made no reply, and ate as fast as he could. And when he was quite finished, he got up and stretched himself. Thank you. "You've got a comfortable-looking bed there," he observed. "I really think that, bad sleeper as I am, I might have a good night on it. I can manage to squeeze you in," he added. "You don't take up a great deal of room." The boy was rather indignant at the bear's cool way of talking, but as soon as he was too tired to gather more fern, they lay down side by side. "Welcome in." The boy was rather indignant at the bear's cool way of talking, but he was too tired to gather more fern, then lay down side by side and never stirred till sunrise the next morning. "I must go now," said the bear, pulling the sleepy prince to his feet. "But first, you shall cut off the tip of my ear, and when you are in any danger, just wish yourself a bear, and you will become one. One good turn deserves another, you know." And the boy did as he was bid, and he and the bear bade each other farewell. "I wonder how it feels to be a bear," he thought to himself. He had walked a little way, and he took out the tip from his breast of the coat, and wished hard that he might become a bear. The next moment his body stretched out, and thick black fur covered him all over. As before, his hands were changed into paws, but when he tried to swish his tail, he found to his disgust that it would not go any distance. "Why, this is hardly worth calling a tale," he said. For the rest of the day, he remained a bear and continued his journey. But as evening came on, the bearskin, which had been so useful when plunging through the brambles of the forest, began to feel rather heavy, and he wished himself a boy again. He was too much exhausted to take the trouble of cutting any fern or seeking any moss, so he just threw himself down under a tree. When exactly above his head he heard a great buzzing as a bumblebee alighted on a honeysuckle branch. "What are you doing here?" asked the bee in a cross voice. "At your age, you ought to be safe at home." "I'm running away from the mermaid," replied the boy. But the bee, like the lion and the bear, was one of those people who never listened to the answers to their questions, and only said, "I'm hungry. Give me something to eat." The boy took his last loaf and flask out of his knapsack and laid them on the ground, and they had supper together. "Now I'm going to sleep," observed the bee when the last crumb was gone. "But you're not very big. I can make room for you beside me." And he curled up his wings and tucked in his legs, and he and the prince both slept soundly until morning. Then the bee got up and carefully brushed every scrap of dust from his velvet coat and buzzed loudly in the boy's ear to wake him. "Take a single hair from one of my wings," he said. "If you're in danger and you wish yourself a bee, you'll become one. One good turn deserves another. So farewell, and thank you for your supper." And the bee departed after the boy had pulled out the hair and wrapped it carefully in a leaf. "It must feel quite different to be a bee from what it feels like to be a lion or a bear," thought the boy to himself, when he had walked for an hour or two. "I dare say I should get on a great deal faster." So he pulled out the hair and wished himself a bee. In a moment the strangest thing happened to him. All his limbs seemed to draw together, and his body to become very short and round, and his head grew quite tiny. Instead of his white skin, he was covered with the richest, softest velvet. Better than all, he had two lovely gauze wings which carried him the whole day without getting tired. Late in the afternoon, the boy fancied he saw a vast heap of stones a long way off, and he flew straight towards it. But when he reached the gates, he saw that it was really a great town, so he wished himself back into his own shape and entered the city. He found the palace doors wide open and went boldly into a sort of hall which was full of people, where men and maids were gossiping together. He joined their talk and soon learned from them that the king had only one daughter, who had such a hatred of men that she would never suffer one to enter her presence. Her father was in despair, and had had pictures painted of the handsomest princes of all the courts in the world, in hopes that she might fall in love with one of them. But it was no use. The princess would not even allow the pictures to be brought into her room. "It is late," remarked one of the women at last. "I must go to my mistress." And turning to one of the lackeys, she bade him find a bed for the youth. "It's not necessary," answered the prince. "This bench is good enough for me, and I am used to nothing better." When the hall was empty, he lay down for a few moments. But as soon as everything was quiet in the palace, he took out the hair and wished himself a bee. And then in the shape he flew upstairs, past the guards, and through the keyhole into the princess's chamber. Then he turned himself into a man again. At this dreadful sight, the princess, who was wide awake, began screaming loudly. "A man! A man!" cried she. When the guards rushed in, there was only a bumblebee buzzing about the room. They looked under the bed, and behind the curtains, and into the cupboards, and came to the conclusion that the princess had had a bad dream, and bowed themselves out. The door was scarcely closed on them when the bee disappeared, and the handsome young youth stood in his place. "I knew a man was hidden somewhere," cried the princess, and screamed more loudly than before. Her shrieks brought back the guards, but though they looked in all kinds of impossible places, no man was to be seen. "He was here a moment ago. I saw him with my own eyes," and the guards dared not contradict her, though they shook their heads and whispered to each other that the princess had gone mad on the subject, and saw a man in every table and chair. And they made up their minds that, let her scream as loudly as she might, they would take no notice. Thank you for the lurk. Now the princess saw clearly what they were thinking, and that her future guards would give her no help, and would perhaps, besides, tell some stories about her to the king, who would shut her up in a lonely tower and prevent her from walking in the gardens among her birds and flowers. So when, for the third time, she beheld the prince standing before her, she did not scream, but sat up in bed, gazing at him in silent terror. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I shall not hurt you." And he began to praise her gardens, of which she had heard the servant speak, and the birds and flowers which she loved, till the princess's anger softened, and she answered him with gentle words. Indeed, they soon became so friendly that she vowed she would marry no one else, and confided to him that in 3 days her father would be off in the wars, leaving his sword in her room. If any man could find it and bring it to him, he would receive her hand as a reward. But at this point the cock crew, and the youth jumped up hastily, saying, "Of course, I shall ride with the king to the war, and if I do not return, take your violin every evening to the seashore and play it, so that the sea kobolds who live at the bottom of the ocean may hear it and come to you." Sea kobolds? Just as the princess had foretold, in 3 days the king set out for war with a large following, and among them was a young prince who had presented himself at court as a young noble in search of adventure. They had left the city many miles behind them, and when the king suddenly discovered that he had forgotten his sword, or though all his attendants instantly offered theirs, he declared that he could fight with none but his own. "The first man who brings it to me from my daughter's room," cried he, "shall not only have her to wife, but after my death shall reign in my stead." At this, the Red Knight, a young prince, and several more turned their horses to ride as fast as the wind back to the palace. But suddenly, a better plan entered the prince's head, and letting the others pass him, he took his precious parcel from his breast and wished himself a lion. Then he bounded, undeterred by the dreadful roars that the horses were frightened and grew unmanageable, and he easily outstripped them. As soon as he reached the gates of the palace, where he hastily changed himself into a bee and flew straight to the princess's room, where he became a man again. She showed him where the sword hung, concealed behind a curtain, and he took it down, saying as he did so, "Be sure not to forget what you have promised to do." The princess made no reply, but smiled sweetly, and slipping a gold ring from her finger, she broke it in two and held half out silently to the prince, while the other half she put into her pocket. He kissed it and ran down the stairs, bearing the sword with him. Some way off he met the Red Knight and the rest, and the Red Knight at first tried to take the sword from him by force, but as the youth proved too strong for him, he gave it up, and resolved to wait for a better opportunity. This soon came, for the day was hot and the prince was thirsty. Perceiving a little stream that ran into the sea, he turned aside, and unbuckling the sword, flung himself on the ground for a long drink. Unluckily, the mermaid happened at that moment to be floating on the water not far off, and knew the boy who had given her before he was born. So she floated gently to an end where he was lying, and she seized him by the arm, and the waves closed over them both. Hardly had they disappeared when the Red Knight stole cautiously up. He could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the king's sword on the bank. He wondered what had become of the youth. But an hour before he had guarded the treasure so fiercely. But after all, that was no affair of his. So fastening the sword to his belt, he carried it to the king. The war was soon over, and the king returned to his people, who welcomed him with shouts of joy. But when the princess from her window saw that her betrothed was not among the attendants riding behind her father, her heart sank, for she knew that some evil must have befallen him, and she feared the Red Knight. She had long ago learned how clever and how wicked he was, and something whispered to her that it was he who would gain the credit for having carried back the sword,
and would claim her as his bride, though he had never entered her chamber. And she could do nothing, for although the king loved her, he could never let her stand in the way of his plans. The poor princess was only too right, and everything came to pass exactly as she had foreseen it. The king told her that the Red Knight had won her fairly, and that the wedding would take place the next day, and there would be a great feast after it. In those days, feasts were much longer and more splendid than they are now, and it was growing dark when the princess, tired out with all she had gone through, stole up to her room for a little quiet. But the moon was shining so brightly over the sea that it seemed to draw her towards it, and taking her violin under her arm, she crept down to the shore. "Listen, listen," said the mermaid to the prince, who was lying stretched on a bed of seaweeds at the bottom of the sea. "Listen, that is your old love playing, for mermaids know everything that happens upon the earth." "I hear nothing," answered the youth, who did not look happy. "Take me up higher, where the sounds can reach me." So the mermaid took him on her shoulders and bore him up midway to the surface. "Can you hear now?" she asked. "No," answered the prince. "I heard nothing but the water rushing. I must go higher still." Then the mermaid carried him to the very top. "You must surely be able to hear it now," said she. "Nothing but water," replied the youth. So she took him right to the land. "At any rate you can hear now," she said again. "The water is still rushing in my ears," he answered. "But wait a little, that will soon pass off." And as he spoke, he put his hand into the breast, and seizing the hair, wished himself a bee, and flew straight into the pocket of the princess. The mermaid looked in vain for him, and coated all night upon the sea, but he never came back, and never more did he gladden her eyes. But the princess felt that something strange was about her, though she knew not what, and returned quickly to the palace, where the young man at once resumed his own shape. Oh, what joy filled her heart at the sight of him! But there was no time to be lost, and she led him right into the hall, where the king and his nobles were still sitting at the feast. "Here is a man who boasts that he can do wonderful tricks," said she, "even better than the Red Knights. That cannot be true, of course, but it might as well give this impostor the lesson. He pretends, for instance, that he can turn himself into a lion. That I do not believe. I know that you have studied the art of magic," she went on, turning to the Red Knight. "So suppose you just show him how it is done, and bring shame upon him." Now, the Red Knight had never opened a book of magic in his life, but he was accustomed to think that he could do everything better than other people without any teaching at all. So he turned and twisted himself about, and bellowed and made faces, but he did not become a lion for all that. "Well, perhaps it is very difficult to change into a lion. Make yourself into a bear," said the princess. But the Red Knight found it no easier to become a bear than a lion. "Try a bee," suggested she. "I've always read that anyone who can do magic at all can do that." And the old knight buzzed and hummed, but he remained a man, and not a bee. "Now it is your turn," said the princess to the youth. "Let us see if you can change yourself into a lion." And in a moment such a fierce creature stood before them, and all the guests rushed out of the hall, treading each other under foot in their fright. The lion sprang at the Red Knight, and would have been torn to pieces had the princess not held him back, and bidden him to change into a man again. In a second, a man took the place of the lion. "Now become a bear," said she, and the bear advanced panting and stretching out its arms to the Red Knight, who shrank behind the princess. But this time some of the guests had regained their courage and returned as far as the door, thinking that if it was safe for the princess, perhaps it was safe for them. The king, who was braver than they, and felt it needed to set a good example besides, never left his seat, and when his new command to the princess, the bear once more turned into a man. He was silent from astonishment, and a suspicion of truth began to dawn on him. "Was it he who fetched the sword?" asked the king. "Yes, it was," answered the princess.
and she told him the whole story. Now, she had broken her gold ring and given him half of it, and the prince took out his half of the ring, and the princess took out hers, and they fitted exactly. The next day, the Red Knight was hanged, as he richly deserved, and there was a new marriage feast for the prince and the princess. Because, yay. Okay, how long is this one? Pivi and Kabo. Only 4 pages. So after that. Five. Okay, I might get 1 or 2 more stories tonight. Once alone. Bulletin de la Société d'Anthropologie. So our next story for the night, Pivi and Kabo. When birds were men and men were birds, Pivi and Kabo lived in an island far away called New Caledonia. Pivi was a cheery little bird that chirps at sunset. Kabo was an ugly black fowl that croaks in the darkness. One day Pivi and Kabo thought they would make slings and practice slinging, as the people of the island often do. So they went to a banyan tree and stripped the bark to make strings for their slings. The next, they repaired to the riverbank to find stones. Kabo stood on the bank of the river, and Pivi went into the water. The game was for Kabo to sling at Pivi, and for Pivi to dodge the stones, if he could. For some time he dodged them cleverly, but at last the stone from Kabo's sling hit poor Pivi on the leg and broke it. Down went Pivi into the stream, and floated along it till he floated into a big hollow bamboo which a woman used for washing her sweet potatoes. "What is that in my bamboo?" said the woman, and she blew in through the other end, and blew little Pivi at the other, like a pea out of a pea shooter. "Oh," cried the woman, "what a poor state you're in! What have you been doing?" "It was Kabo who broke my leg in the slinging game," said Pivi. "Well, I'm sorry for you," said the woman. "Will you come with me and do what I tell you?" "I will," said Pivi, for the woman was very kind and pretty. She took Pivi into a shed where she kept her fruit laid out for him, laid him on a bed of mats, made him comfortable as she could, and attended to his broken leg without cutting off the flesh down to the bone, as some people usually do. "You will be so, won't you, Pivi?" she said. "If you hear a little noise, you will pretend to be dead. It is a black ant who will come and creep from your feet to your head. Say nothing. Keep quiet, won't you, Pivi?" "Certainly, kind lady," said Pivi. "I will lie as still as I can." "Next will come the big red ant. You know him?" "Yes, I know him. With his feet like the grasshoppers." "He will walk over your body up to your head. Then you must shake all your body. Do you understand, Pivi?" "Yes, dear lady, I shall do just as you say." "Very good," said the woman, going out and shutting the door. Pivi lay still under his coverings. Then a tiny noise was heard, and a black ant began to march all over Pivi, who lay quite still. Then came the big red ant, skipping along his body, and then Pivi shook himself all over. He jumped quite well again, and he ran back to the river, but looked into the water and saw that he was changed from a bird to a fine young man. "Oh, lady, look at me now! You changed into a man! Oh, so handsome!" "Will you obey me again?" said the woman. "Always. Whatever you command, I will do it," said Pivi politely. "And climb up to that coconut tree with only your legs, not using your hands." Now, The natives can run up coconut trees like squirrels, some using only one hand. Girls can do that, but few can climb without using their hands at all. At the top of the tree you will find 2 coconuts. You must not throw them down, but carry them in your hands, and as you must descend went up, using your legs only. I can try at least, said Pivi, and up he went, but it was very difficult, and down he came. Here are your coconuts, he said, presenting them to the woman. Now, Pivi, put them in the shed where you lay, and when the sun sets to cool itself in the sea, and rise again not so hot, and the dawn, you must go and take the nuts. All day Pivi played about the river, as natives do, throwing fruits in silvery showers at one another. When the sun set, he went into the hut, but as he drew near, he heard sweet voices talking and laughing within. What is that? People chattering in the hut. Perhaps they've taken my coconuts, said Pivi to himself. And in he went, and he found 2 pretty, laughing, teasing girls. He hunted for his coconuts, but none were there. Down he ran to the river. Oh, lady, my nuts have been stolen, he cried. Come with me, Pivi, there will be nuts for you, said the woman. They went back to the hut, where the girls were laughing and playing. Nuts for you, said the woman. There are 2 wives for you, Pivi. Take them to your house. Oh, good lady, how kind you are. So they were married and very happy, when in came cross old Kabo. Is this Pivi? Said he. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's not the same Pivi. And they're a kind of likeness. Tell me, are you Pivi? Oh, yes, said Pivi, and I'm much better looking, and there are my 2 wives. Are they not beautiful? You're mocking me, Pivi. Your wives? How? Where did you get them? You, with wives? Then Pivi told Kabo about the kind woman, and all the wonderful things that happened to him. Well, well, said Kabo. But I want to be handsome, too, and have 2 pretty young wives. But how can you manage that? Asked Pivi. Oh, you shall do the same things over again. Play at slinging, and this time you shall break my leg, Pivi. With all the pleasures in life, said Pivi, who was always ready to oblige. So they went slinging, and Pivi broke Kabo's leg, and Kabo fell into the river, and floated into the bamboo, and the woman blew him out just as before. Then she picked up Kabo and put him in the shed, and told him what to do when the black ant came, and what to do when the red ant came. But he didn't. When the black ant came, he shook himself, and behold, he had a twisted leg and a humped back, and was as black as the ant. Then he ran to the woman. Look what a figure I am, he said, but she only told him to climb the tree, as she had told Pivi. But Kabo climbed with both hands and feet, and he threw down the nuts instead of carrying them down, and put them in the hut. When he went back, he found 2 horrid old hags, wraggling and scolding and scratching. So he went back to Pivi with 2 beautiful wives, and Pivi was very sorry, but what could he do? Nothing but sit and cry. So one day Kabo came and asked Pivi to sail in his canoe to a place where he knew were great big shellfish, enough to feed on for a week. And Pivi went, and deep in the crystal clear water they saw the monstrous shellfish, like an oyster, as big as a rock, and with a shell wide open. We shall catch it and try it, and kipper it, said Pivi, and give a dinner to all our friends. I shall dive for it, and break it off of the rock, said Kabo, and then you must help me drag it up to the canoe. There the shellfish lay and gaped, but Kabo, though he dived in well out of the way of the beast, up he came, puffing and blowing. Oh, Pivi, I cannot move it. I tried. Jump in and try yourself. Pivi dived in with his spear, and the shellfish opened its shell wider yet, and sucked, and Pivi disappeared into its mouth, and the shell shut with a snap. Kabo laughed like a fiend, and then went home. Where's Pivi? Asked the 2 girls. Kabo pretended to cry, and told how Pivi had been swallowed. But dry your tears, my darlings, said Kabo. I will be your husband, and my wives shall be your slaves. Everything is for the best, and the best of all possible worlds.
No, no, cried the girls. We love Pivi. We do not love anyone else. We should stay at home and weep for Pivi. Wretched idiots, cried Pablo. Pivi was a scoundrel who broke my leg and knocked me into the river. Then a little cough was heard at the door, and Kabo trembled, for he knew it was a cough of Pivi. Ah, dear Pivi, cried Kabo, rushing to the door. What joy! I was trying to console your dear wives. Pivi said not one word. He waved his hand, and 25 of his friends came trooping down the hill. They cut up Kabo into little pieces. Pivi turned around, and there was the good woman of the river. Pivi, she said, how did you get out of the living tomb into which Kabo sent you? I had my spear with me, said Pivi. It was quite dry inside the shell, and I worked away with the fish with my spear, till he saw reason to open a shell, and out I came. Then the good woman laughed, and Pivi and his 2 wives lived happily ever afterwards. Okay. So, listen to what the river woman tells you. Okay, this one is maybe 5 pages. So, it'll be our last draft for the evening. So, our final tale for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales. The Elf Maiden. Once upon a time, 2 young men lived in a small village who fell in love with the same girl. During winter, it was all night except for an hour or so about noon, when the darkness seemed a little less dark, and then they used to see which of them could tempt her out with a sleigh ride, with the northern lights flashing above them, or which could persuade her to come to the dance in some neighboring barn. But when spring began and the light grew longer, the hearts of the villagers leapt at the light of the sun, and the day was fixed for boats to be brought out, and the great nets to be spread on the bays of some islands that lay a few miles to the north. Everybody went on this expedition, and the 2 men and the girl went with them. They all sailed merrily across the sea, chattering like a flock of magpies, or singing their favorite songs. And when they reached the shore, what an unpacked there was! For this was the noted fishing ground, where they would all live in little wooden huts till autumn and the bad weather came around again. The maiden and the 2 young men happened to share the same hut with some friends, and fished daily from the same boat. As time went on, one of the youths remarked the girl took less notice of him than she did of his companion. At first he tried to think that he was dreaming, and for a long while he kept his eyes shut very tight to what he did not want to see. But in spite of his efforts, the truth managed to wriggle through. Then the young man gave up trying to deceive himself, and set about finding some way to get the better of his rival. The plan that he hit upon could not be carried out for some months, but the longer the young man thought of it, the more pleased he was with it. So he made no sign of his feelings, and waited patiently till the moment came. This was the very day that they were all going to leave the islands, and sail back to the mainland for the winter. In the bustle and hurry of departure, the cunning fishermen contrived that their boat should be the last to put out. When everything was ready, and sails were about to be set, he suddenly called out, "Oh dear, what am I should do? I've left my best knife behind in the hut. Run like a good fellow and get it for me, while I raise the anchor and loosen the tiller." Not thinking any harm, the youth jumped back on the shore and made his way to the steep bank. At the door of the hut he stopped and looked back, and stared and gazed in horror. The head of the boat stood out to the sea, and he was left alone on the island. There was no doubt of it. He was quite alone, and he had nothing to help him except the knife which his comrade had purposely dropped on the ledge of the window. For some minutes he was too stunned by the treachery of his friend to think about anything at all. But after a while he shook himself awake, and determined that he would manage to keep alive somehow, if only to avenge himself.
So he put the knife in his pocket and went off for the part of the island which was not so bare as the rest, and had a small grove of trees. From these he cut himself a bow, and then strung a piece of cord that had been left lying in the huts. When this was ready, the young man ran down to the shore and shot one or two seabirds, then plucked and cooked them for supper. In this way the months slipped by, and Christmas came around again. The evening before, the youth went down to the rocks and into the copse, and collecting all the driftwood the sea had washed up or the gale had blown down, and piled up a great stack outside his door, so that he might not have to fetch any the next day. As soon as his task was done, he paused and looked out towards the mainland, thinking of Christmas Eve last year, and the merry dance they had had. The night was still cold, and by the help of the northern lights, he could see almost across to the opposite coast, when suddenly he noticed a boat which seemed steering straight for the island. At first he could hardly stand the joy, and the chance of speaking to another man was delightful, but as the boat drew near, there was something, he could not tell what, that was different from the boats which he had been used to all his life. And when it touched the shore, he saw that the people that filled it were beings of another world than ours. Then he hastily stepped behind the wood stack and waited for what might happen next. The strange folk jumped one by one onto the rocks, each bearing a load of something that they wanted. Among the women he remarked two young girls, more beautiful and dressed better than any of the rest, carrying between them two great baskets full of provisions. The young man peeped out cautiously to see what this crowd could be doing inside the tiny hut, but in a moment he drew back again, as the girls returned, and looked about as if they wanted to find out what sort of island it was. Their sharp eyes soon discovered the form of a man crouching behind the bundle of sticks, and at first they felt a little frightened, and started as if they would run away. But the youth remained still, that they took courage and laughed gaily to each other. "What a strange creature! Let us try to see what he's made of," said one, and stooped down, and gave him a pinch. Now the young man had a pin sticking in the sleeve of his jacket, and the moment the girl's hand touched him, she pricked it so sharply that blood came. The girl screamed so loudly that the people all ran out from the hut to see what was the matter. But directly they caught sight of the man, they turned and fled in the other direction, and picking up the goods they had brought with them, they scampered as fast as they could down to the shore. In an instant, boat, people, and goods had vanished completely. In their hurry they had, however, forgotten two things: a bundle of keys which lay on the table, and that girl whom the pin had pricked, and now who stood pale and helpless beside the woodstack. "You'll have to make me your wife," she said at last, "for you have drawn my blood, and I belong to you." "Why not? I'm quite willing," answered he. "But how do you suppose we can manage to live here till summer comes around again?" "Do not be anxious about that," said the girl. "If you will only marry me, all will be well. I am very rich, and all my family are rich also." The young man gave her his promise to make her his wife, and the girl fulfilled her part of the bargain. The food was plentiful on the island, and all through the winter long months, though he never knew how it got there. And by and by it was spring once more, and time for the fisher folk to sail for the mainland. "Where are we to go now?" asked the girl one day, when the sun seemed brighter and the wind softer than usual. "I do not care where I go," answered the man. "What do you think?" The girl replied that she would like to go somewhere right at the other end of the island, and build a house, far away from the huts of the fishing folk. And he consented, and that very day they set off in search of a sheltered spot on the banks of the stream, so that they could easily get water. In a tiny bay on the opposite side of the island they found the very thing which seemed to be made on purpose for them. As they were tired of the long walk, they laid themselves down on the bank of moss among some birches, and prepared to have a good night's rest, so as to be fresh for work the next day. Before she went to sleep, the girl turned to her husband and said, "If in your dreams you fancy that you hear strange noises, be sure that you do not stir, or get up to see what it is." "Oh, it shall not be likely I should hear any noises in such a quiet place," answered he, and he found himself falling asleep. Suddenly he was awakened by a great clatter about his ears, as if the workmen in the world were sawing and hammering and building close to him. when he was going to spring up and go to see what it meant, when he luckily remembered his wife's words to lay still. But the time till morning seemed very long. With the first ray of sun, they both rose and pushed aside the branches of the birch tree. There, in the very place they had chosen, stood a beautiful house, doors and windows and everything, all complete.
Now you must fix on Spot and their cow stalls,
said the girl, as they had breakfast with raw cherries.
and take care it's the proper size, neither too large nor too small.
And the husband did as he was bid, though he wondered what use a cow-house would be, as they had no cows to put in it. But he was a little afraid of his wife, who knew so much more than he. He asked no questions. That night, also, he was awakened by the same sounds as before, and in the morning they found, near the stream, the most beautiful cow-house that was ever seen, with stalls and milk pails and stools, all complete. Indeed, everything that a cow-house could possibly want, except the cows. Then the girl bade him measure out the ground for a storehouse, and this she said, as might be large as it pleased. When the storehouse was ready, she proposed that they should set off to pay her parents a visit. Old people welcomed her heartily, and summoned their neighbors from many miles around to a great feast in their honor. In fact, for several weeks there was no work done on the farm at all, and at length the young man and his wife grew tired of such play, and declared they must return to their own home. But before they started the journey, the wife whispered to her husband,
Take care to jump over the threshold as quick as you can, or it'll be worse for you.
The man listened to her words and sprang over the threshold like an arrow from a bow, and it was well that he did, for no sooner was he on the other side than his father-in-law threw a great hammer at him, which would have broken both his legs, if it had only touched them. When they had gone some distance on the road home, the girl turned to her husband and said,
Till you sleep inside the house, be sure not to look back, whatever you may hear or see.
The husband promised, and for a while all was still, and he thought no more of the matter till he noticed at last that the nearer he drew to the house, the louder grew the noise of the trampling of feet behind him. As he laid his hand upon the door, he thought he was safe, and turned to look. There, sure enough, was a vast herd of cattle which had been sent after him by the father-in-law when he found his daughter had been cleverer than he. Half the herd were already through the fence and chomping the grass on the banks of the stream, while the other half remained outside and faded into nothing, even as he watched them. However, enough cattle were left to make the young man rich, and he and his wife lived happily together, except that every now and then the girl vanished from his sight, and never told him where she had been. For a long time he kept silent about it, but one day, when he had been complaining about her absence, she said to him,
Dear husband, I am bound to go, even against my will, and there's only one way to stop me. Drive a nail on the threshold, and then I can never pass in or out.
And so he did. Okay, so to keep an elf wife, you have to make her a prisoner? Interesting. But anyway, thank you all for coming in for this Friday Night of Fairy Tales. Let's see who might be on that we can read. Of course, I see the lovely and talented Miss Dusk. Who is doing some art, because art is cool. Thank you for coming in, Griffin. So what did you think of the stories? Well, those of you who don't follow already, go follow Huck Griffin. Yeah, a lot of the stories did have abrupt endings. I think it's to the point that it got to the point that people were reading these to kids in bed, and the kids were already asleep, so they just went, "The end." Like, nothing more to say. Story's over. You're asleep. And I try to shut people out. Yes. Sleepy time awaits. So, those are my generic raid messages. And we're going to raid Dusk. He was doing some art, so art's always nice to watch. It was nice and relaxing anyway. So, the VODs will be late, so I apologize for that. Anyone wants to rewatch the stories, no, come back and watch the channel. But for now, good night everyone. I'll see you over in Dusks.
Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness would creep, protecting those